The clover-free, dandelion-free lawn you were taught to want is younger than the television sitting in your living room. For most of American history, before the 1950s, a good lawn was expected to have clover growing in it on purpose. Seed companies packaged it into the mix themselves, not as a mistake, but because it did something for the grass around it that nothing else in the bag could do. Then, within about a decade, clover went from a deliberate ingredient to an enemy homeowners were told to eliminate. And the reason has almost nothing to do with what's actually good for a lawn and everything to do with a chemical that got invented in a lab. I'm going to explain exactly what happened there later in this video, because once you understand it, you'll never look at a bag of weed and feed the same way again. But that's not even the most useful thing I'm going to show you today. The single biggest lever for a genuinely green, thick, weed-resistant lawn all summer costs you nothing, requires no product at all, and it's something almost every homeowner in this country is doing exactly backwards without knowing it. I'm going to walk you through the real reason cutting your grass short is quietly working against you, why bagging your clippings is throwing away free fertilizer, how deep you actually need to water, and how often an old natural compound most people have never heard of that stops weed seeds before they ever sprout. And that full story on clover I promised you, including why an entire industry had a real financial reason to convince you it was a problem. This is everything, laid out properly, not one more listicle of 5 quick tips you'll forget by the time you're back outside. Start here, because if you only take one thing from this entire video, this is the one that changes the most for the least effort. How high you cut your grass, and how often does more for a lawn's color, thickness, and natural weed resistance than any product you could buy, and most people set their mower height without ever thinking about why it matters. A grass plant's root system develops in rough proportion to how much leaf surface it has above ground, because roots are grown and maintained using energy the plant produces through photosynthesis in those leaves, and the more leaf surface a plant has, the more energy it can generate to invest in a deeper, more resilient root system. Cut your grass short, and you're not just changing how the lawn looks. You're directly limiting how much energy the plant has available to grow and maintain roots, which produces a shallower root system that struggles more in heat, dries out faster, and has less reserve capacity to recover from stress of any kind, whether that's foot traffic, drought, or disease. There's a second effect that matters just as much, and it's the one most people have genuinely never heard explained. Weed seeds sitting in soil need a light trigger to germinate for a huge number of common lawn weed species. It's part of how the seed detects it's actually at or near the surface rather than buried too deep to successfully emerge. A lawn cut short leaves far more bare soil exposed to direct sunlight between grass blades, which is exactly the light signal a dormant weed seed is waiting for. Let your grass grow taller and thicker, and the canopy of grass blades shades the soil surface enough to meaningfully suppress that germination trigger for a significant number of weed species. Which means a taller lawn isn't just healthier, it's actively, mechanically discouraging new weeds from ever sprouting in the first place, entirely for free using nothing but the height you already set your mower to. The actual number to aim for depends somewhat on your specific grass species, but as a general guideline for most common lawn types in this country, somewhere between 3 and 4 inches is considerably healthier than the shorter cut most people default to. And there's a second rule that matters just as much as the target height itself. Never remove more than about 1/3 of the total blade height in any single mowing. Cut a lawn that's grown to 6 inches down to 3 in one pass, and you've removed half the plant's leaf surface at once, which is a genuine shock to the plant, forcing it to draw on stored root reserves to recover rather than continuing normal growth. Mow more frequently at a smaller amount removed each time, rather than letting grass grow long and then scalping it back down in one dramatic cut, and you avoid that shock entirely, while still keeping the canopy tall enough to do the weed suppression work described above. While we're talking about mowing, I want to correct something that's been repeated so often it's become accepted as fact despite being genuinely wrong, because it's costing people free fertilizer they're paying to bag up and haul to the curb instead. The common belief is that leaving grass clippings on the lawn after mowing causes thatch buildup, that spongy layer of dead organic material that can accumulate between the soil and the green grass above it, and it's simply not true. Thatch is made up of slowly decomposing root and stem tissue, the actual structural parts of the plant, not the leaf blade clippings your mower produces. And clippings themselves are roughly 90% water by weight, which means they break down and disappear back into the soil within days under normal conditions, contributing essentially nothing to thatch buildup at all. What thatch actually results from is a lawn producing root and stem tissue faster than soil microorganisms can decompose it, a genuinely different process with different causes, most commonly overly frequent shallow watering and excessive nitrogen fertilization, pushing rapid, tender growth faster than it can be broken down. What those clippings actually do, left on the lawn rather than bagged and hauled away, is return a meaningful amount of nitrogen and organic matter directly back into the soil as they decompose. Turf research has found grasscycling, the practice of simply leaving clippings in place, can supply a genuinely significant share of a lawn's total nitrogen needs over a season, essentially fertilizing your lawn every single time you mow it for free, using material you were previously paying yourself in time and effort to remove. If you're currently bagging clippings specifically because you were taught it prevents thatch, that belief is costing you free fertilizer for no actual benefit, and it's worth simply switching your mower to mulch or discharge mode and letting the clippings fall. This next principle runs directly against what feels intuitive to most people, which is exactly why it's so commonly done backwards. A daily light sprinkle feels like it should be good for a lawn, frequent attention, keeping the surface consistently damp, but it actually trains the root system to stay shallow, because roots only grow as deep as they need to in order to reliably reach available water. If water is always sitting right at the surface, there's no pressure on the plant to send roots down deeper looking for it, and a shallow-rooted lawn is considerably more vulnerable to heat stress, drought, and general decline than a deep-rooted one, even though the daily watering feels like it should be producing the opposite result. The better approach is deep, infrequent watering, roughly an inch of water per week total for most common lawn types during the growing season, applied in 1 or 2 sessions rather than spread across 7 light daily waterings. That single deep soaking penetrates further into the soil, which gives the root system an actual reason to grow downward chasing it, producing a deeper, more drought-resilient root structure over time. You can check whether you're actually applying about an inch by setting a few shallow, flat-bottomed containers around your yard during a watering session and timing how long it takes to collect roughly that depth, which tells you exactly how long to run your own specific sprinkler setup to hit that target. Timing matters here too, and it's worth getting right. Water early in the morning, roughly the 6 to 10 o'clock window, rather than in the evening. Grass watered in the morning has the entire day ahead of it to dry off in the sun and moving air, while grass watered in the evening sits wet overnight. And that prolonged overnight leaf wetness is one of the more significant factors behind fungal lawn diseases, since most fungal pathogens need sustained moisture on the leaf surface to establish and spread. Morning watering also loses less water to evaporation than watering during the heat of midday, so you're getting more of what you apply actually down into the soil rather than lost to the air before it ever reaches the roots. Here's something I want to properly set up before I explain it, because it genuinely surprised me the first time I learned about it, and I think it'll surprise you too. There is a completely natural substance derived from an ordinary food byproduct that acts as a real pre-emergent weed treatment, stopping a meaningful share of weed seeds before they ever sprout. And it has nothing to do with any synthetic chemical at all. I'll tell you exactly what it is and how to use it correctly in just a moment. But first, there's one more piece you need in place, because using this compound at the wrong time of year does essentially nothing. And I don't want you wasting money and effort on something that only works within a specific window. That window is tied to soil temperature, not the calendar date, which is exactly why so many people who've tried this and given up on it were actually just applying it too late. The compound I'm describing is corn gluten meal, a genuinely ordinary byproduct of processing corn for other uses. And research going back to work done at Iowa State University in the 1990s established that it contains compounds which specifically inhibit root formation in germinating seeds at the precise moment they're sprouting without harming plants that are already established and growing. Applied to your lawn before weed seeds germinate in spring, it interferes with the new root the sprouting seed is trying to form, and that seedling simply fails to establish. Here's the honest limitation, and I want to be straightforward about it rather than oversell a genuinely useful tool into something it isn't. Corn gluten meal only works as a preventive measure against seeds that haven't sprouted yet. It does nothing at all against weeds already established and growing in your lawn, and using it too late in the season after germination has already happened is simply wasted product and wasted effort. Timing has to be tied to soil temperature specifically, since germination timing varies by region and by year depending on how quickly the ground actually warms. A soil thermometer, a genuinely inexpensive tool checked periodically through early spring, tells you far more reliably than a fixed calendar date when your local soil has crossed into the temperature range where common weed seeds are starting to germinate, which is exactly the window you want this application timed just ahead of. Applied correctly and on time, it's a real, legitimate, natural pre-emergent. Applied at the wrong moment, it's simply corn byproduct spread on your lawn doing nothing at all, which is exactly why so many people who've tried it once concluded it doesn't work, when the truth is almost always that the timing was off rather than the compound itself failing. Every bare or visibly thin patch in a lawn is functioning as an open invitation to whatever weed seed happens to land there next, for the same basic reason described earlier. Open soil with direct light access is exactly what a dormant seed is waiting for, and a thin lawn simply has more of that open access than a thick one. Overseeding, spreading additional grass seed matched to your region and light conditions directly into an existing lawn rather than only into bare dirt, thickens the overall turf density over time, and a denser stand of grass is directly mechanically competing with weed seeds for the same light, water, and soil space a weed would otherwise have access to. This is straightforward ecological competition. The more of a resource your desired plant is already using, the less is available for something else trying to move in. Early fall is generally the strongest window for overseeding most common cool season lawn types, since soil is still warm enough to support germination while cooler air temperatures reduce stress on the tender new grass compared to seeding in the heat of summer, though the right window does shift depending on which grass species is actually appropriate for your specific region. A thin layer of finished compost spread evenly across a lawn a few times a year is an old, straightforward way to improve soil health that works entirely differently from a synthetic fertilizer application, rather than delivering a concentrated, fast-release dose of specific nutrients the way a bagged synthetic fertilizer does. Compost top dressing works slowly, feeding the community of soil microorganisms that break organic matter down into forms grass roots can actually use, while also gradually improving the soil's physical structure, its ability to hold both water and air in the right balance for healthy root growth. A quarter-inch or so, raked or dragged evenly across the lawn surface a couple of times through the growing season, works itself down between the grass blades and into the soil over the following weeks, and it's a genuinely old practice, used long before synthetic fertilizer existed as an option at all, still valuable today specifically because it improves the actual soil rather than just temporarily feeding the plant sitting on top of it. Now, for that story, I promised you at the very start, because understanding it properly changes how you think about a lot of what gets marketed as normal lawn care. Clover is a legume in the same broad plant family as beans and peas, and legumes host a specific type of bacteria in nodules on their roots capable of pulling nitrogen directly out of the air and converting it into a form plants can use. The same biological nitrogen-fixing process behind why beans work so well planted alongside corn in the traditional Three Sisters growing method. A lawn with clover growing through it is, in a very real sense, being continuously fertilized by that clover for free, which is exactly why grass seed companies included it deliberately in lawn seed mixes for a very long stretch of American history. It wasn't an accident or a contaminant. It was doing real, useful work for the grass growing around it. What changed wasn't anything about clover itself. It was the development of selective broadleaf herbicides in the years following World War II, chemical formulations specifically designed to kill broadleaf plants while leaving grass, which has a different leaf structure, unharmed. Clover, being a broadleaf plant itself, was killed by these new herbicides right alongside actual problem weeds like dandelions. And rather than that being treated as an unfortunate side effect worth working around, it became genuinely convenient from a marketing standpoint to simply redefine clover itself as an unwanted weed rather than a beneficial lawn component. Since a product that kills a huge range of broadleaf plants indiscriminately is much easier to sell as kills weeds, if clover has already been recategorized as one of them, rather than acknowledging that this new product was also killing something homeowners had been intentionally growing on purpose for generations. If you're comfortable with a little clover in your lawn, and I genuinely encourage you to be, given everything I just explained, you get a lawn that's fertilizing itself in the spots where clover establishes without spending $1 or lifting a bag of synthetic product. If you'd rather keep a lawn that's entirely grass for whatever reason of your own, that's a completely reasonable choice too. One more piece worth covering, because it undermines every other technique in this video if it's wrong from the start. A huge number of struggling lawns aren't struggling because of anything the homeowner is doing wrong day to day. They're struggling because the grass species growing there was never well suited to the actual growing conditions in the first place, and no amount of correct mowing height or watering technique fully overcomes a fundamental mismatch between the plant and its environment. Sun-loving grass species planted in a heavily shaded yard will always struggle to establish real density no matter how well you otherwise care for it, since the plant simply isn't getting enough light to support vigorous growth, and a naturally thin, struggling lawn in that situation is exactly the open, light, exposed soil condition that invites the weed problems described throughout this video. If a particular area of your yard has consistently struggled regardless of how carefully you've applied everything else here, it's worth checking whether the grass species actually growing there is appropriate for the light and soil conditions in that specific spot, since overseeding that area specifically with a shade-tolerant variety suited to your region often resolves a problem that no amount of technique adjustment on the existing grass ever will. Here's how all of this fits together across an actual growing season rather than as a list of separate ideas. Set your mower height up to 3 or 4 inches and keep it there consistently, removing no more than a third of the blade in any single cut, and let the clippings fall rather than bagging them. Water deeply once or twice a week rather than lightly every day, timed for the early morning window. In early spring, once your soil temperature has actually crossed into the germination range for your region rather than on a fixed calendar date. Apply corn gluten meal as a preventive measure against the season's new weed seeds. Through the growing season, top dress with a thin layer of compost a couple of times to keep feeding the soil itself. In early fall, overseed to thicken any areas that have thinned out, particularly matching species to shade if that's been a persistent problem anywhere in the yard. And somewhere in all of that, make your own peace with how much clover you're comfortable letting stay, understanding now exactly what it's actually doing for you if you do. None of this requires a subscription lawn service, a shed full of separate branded products, or a single trip to buy synthetic fertilizer or herbicide. Here's what I'd actually change this week if you're looking at your own lawn right now. Raise your mower deck if it's set low and let your clippings fall instead of bagging them. Both changes cost you nothing and both start working immediately before you've spent a single dollar on anything else in this video. Tell me in the comments what your lawn's biggest struggle has actually been.